Thank you. Thanks a lot. Good evening, everybody, and bon appetit. Thanks for inviting BEUC, which Ms. Ford already introduced. The sharing economy is a growing issue of interest for us and for all of our members. And when I hear the debate that we're having tonight, I hear a lot of enthusiasm about it. And we're normally maybe expected in a lot of policy debates in Brussels to come and be the boring guy that's going to come and say, yeah, but what about the consumer? Wait a second, there's a problem. There's always a problem. Well, guess what? Today we share part of that enthusiasm. Many of our national member organizations are telling us many of these platforms that are arising are great because they're giving, like it has been explained before, a lot of new opportunities for consumers to access, to manifest their demand in a different way, to access cheaper prices, more convenient services, it matches demand and supply in a better way. But importantly as well, which we haven't addressed so much today, is that it gives what we are calling internally the prosumers new opportunities to put an idle asset or to offer a service in a way in which it wasn't so easy before. And in that sense, the message that we're getting, and I'd like to echo because it has been said before, is that we should be careful not to over-regulate this whole new phenomenon. That's fine. Let's be cautious about that. But there's always a but. And I'll leave you with so when we look at this internally with our members, what we see is that in different countries, what is happening in the sharing economy, because the platforms that are present are different, because the problems are different, there is very difficult to come up with one-size-fits-all analysis and therefore solution to any issues that we might detect. But let me maybe make a few comments about, first from a competition perspective, and then from the more traditional consumer issues. I think on competition issues, many of these things have been, many of the problems have been highlighted already. The broader issues that apply to the question of how do we apply traditional competition policy in the online environment also apply here. It's a matter of how do we define markets. Is BlaBlaCar in competition with Uber? Is Airbnb in competition with hotels? From a consumer perspective, are those services the same? Are they substitutable? Or do we define a hotel room because of services that exist, additional services that exist that wouldn't typically exist in an Airbnb scenario, for example? Is the service for profit or not? Which is very important as well. There's the question of the power of data, and how is the power that, in terms of how much data a specific platform controls, has in the competition, from a competition perspective. All these questions need to be addressed. But I would agree with what Alexandre said before. The key goal here is that markets need to remain open. What we cannot afford is that because of this whole enthusiasm that we have for new platforms, then new bottlenecks start arising, or new positions of unfair dominance start being created as well. And then from a more traditional consumer protection perspective, here, like I mentioned, the first observation that we would have to make is that there's no one-size-fits solution across all sectors. Different problems and different regulatory frameworks apply in different sectors. The key message for us here is that let's free ride on this whole new phenomenon, but let's make sure that we are not taking a big step back in terms of consumer protection. We need to be able to square the circle in this respect, and therefore what we have to find is how to, with different regulatory tools that there are at our disposal, make sure that consumers, both consumers and prosumers, are able to interact in these platforms under a safe environment. Now, are today's rules fit for purpose? Our answer at this stage is that we don't know yet, and that's why the exercise that the European Commission is doing, both with the regulatory mapping that DG Grow is leading and also the very technical study that DG Justice is leading, is a very important first step. From our preliminary analysis, there are three main legal and policy challenges. First, we need to analyze how existing legislation applies. Second, we need to identify where are the regulatory gaps, and I would agree, first let's identify the concerns, not the solutions. Sure. And then we need to address those gaps in an efficient and enforceable way. And that's where maybe down the line we will have a bigger debate about whether guidance is sufficient or whether we would actually have to go into specific regulatory instruments and tailor them to today's world. But there are two very specific, a bit more technical questions that we had identified are important from a consumer perspective. The first one is when a consumer goes to a platform and accesses a service, a sharing economy service, whether it's accommodation, whether it's transport, whether it's a financial services because he goes on a crowdfunding platform or whatever, is he dealing with a trader or is he dealing with another consumer? And that distinction has very important legal consequences because the legal regimes that apply are different. Traditional consumer legislation will apply if the consumer is dealing with a trader at the end, not the platform, a trader that is offering the offline service. But it won't if he or she is dealing with another person that is a consumer. I'll take, for example, just to illustrate this, in the accommodation sector. If a consumer goes on an accommodation platform in Austria and offers 4 apartments to rent, he'll be considered a consumer. And so if I go and rent from him, there's a specific, probably the civil code that regulates our transaction. But if that person rents out a 5th apartment, then he is considered by national law a trader. And that changes. If I am a guest on the platform, I should know these differences because the rights that I have are different. So then the question there is how do we find solutions, which is probably on a case-by-case and sector-by-sector basis, because we understand Airbnb is not the same as HomeAway or as other competitors in the same thing, and the same applies to transport services or any other sector. How do we make sure that consumers can get that information and understand that? And the additional challenge is also what is the role of the platform? Now, we would agree, we are also very much enthusiasts about the e-commerce directive. It has done a great job in developing the digital economy in Europe. But that's only about the information service. That's only about the pure platform service, the intermediation service. But what happens when the platform actually has a role in delivering the service that is happening offline? According to different business models, that role will be different as well. So if we analyze in detail what are the differences between BlaBlaCar, between Uber, between Lyft, between other transport services, their implication, their role in delivering the offline service will be different. Some of them will be purely intermediary business models, and that's fine. Then they shouldn't have any additional obligation on the offline services. But in many cases, they won't. They will actually have a role in the delivery of the offline service, and we need to ask ourselves then what should be the consequences of that. Last but not least, I'd like to maybe tell you that 4 of our biggest members are undergoing a very broad analysis, legal and economic analysis of the sharing economy in their own countries, and they have surveyed over 10,000 consumers to understand better what are the problems, what are the issues, what do they like about the different sharing economy platforms. We should have that available and hopefully be able to present it to all of you early next year, because we would agree, this would be my final remark, that we need to take decisions here that are well based on evidence and make sure that we don't leave behind our European standards of traditional consumer protection, but at the same time that we don't miss the opportunity that this whole new phenomenon is bringing. Thank you.